Today's story is another story that takes place in the desert. Many of our important stories happen in the desert. The desert is such a harsh place. It is hot. The skin burns and blisters. The sun burns and blisters your skin. The wind can whip these little grains of sand and they sting. And then at night, it is so cold. There's no water in the desert. So that means that there's very little growing things. And there's no animals because there's nothing to eat. People really only go into the desert if they absolutely have to. God's people were living in a land where the rain stopped falling, and the crops weren't growing, and the people were starving. And the moms and dads could hear their children crying in their sleep because they were so hungry. And so eventually, God's people made the very difficult decision to go into the desert and see if they can find a new place to live. The journey was very difficult. The desert was hot, and it was hard to find things to eat. But they continued on their journey, making their way through the desert. Eventually, they came to a new land, and that land was called Egypt. And in the land of Egypt, in the land of Egypt, the king was called the Pharaoh. And when God's people arrived in Egypt, they were able to find work and they were able to find food. But the Pharaoh trapped them. And he made it so they could only work when he said he could work. They made it so they could only get food when he said he could get food. He made it so God's people were slaves. Now, one of God's people was Moses, and he would go to the Pharaoh and he would say, "Let my people go." But the Pharaoh would say, "No." And so Moses would go back. And then he would ask again, "Let my people go." But the Pharaoh would say, "No." And then terrible things started to happen. A plague came, locusts came, and eventually something really, really terrible came, where the oldest boy in each Egyptian family died one night. But the people of God protected their children by marking their doors so the angel of death passed over their homes. After this terrible event, Moses went to the Pharaoh and he said, "Let my people go." But instead of saying his usual no, the Pharaoh said yes. But Moses knew he could easily change his mind. So he went back and he got the people of God to pack up their things quickly, and so they could get out of there before the Pharaoh changed his mind. So they did that. They moved so fast that the bread that they usually allow to rise, they couldn't do that. They didn't have time. And so they had this unleavened bread that they called matzah, which we actually have some here in the Godly Playroom that I can show you. But they made this bread this way because it didn't have time to rise. They were in such a hurry. So the people of God were rushing out of Egypt, and they came to a spot where there was water, and suddenly they could hear what sounded like thunder coming behind them, and that was the army from the Pharaoh. The soldiers were coming, and they were pushing the people of God up against the water. They had nowhere to go, and so Moses came close to the water, and then he felt God come close to him, and at that point he knew he can make it through the water with the people. And so he headed towards the water, and suddenly the water parted. And the people could make their way through. So Moses led the way, and the people of God hurried after him. And I imagine they thought the sight of the water parting for them was very, very amazing. They probably stopped to wonder what was going on, but they also were afraid that that water could come back at any point. So they hurried through the water as it parted for them. And then just as the soldiers were coming, the water closed behind them. And the people of God were safe on the other side. And they were happy. They were so happy because they made it through. And they were on the other side of the water, and the soldiers were over here, and they knew that they were safe. So they danced. And they celebrated. Now, what do you think was the most important part of that story? What do you think, Will?
When they got through the water and it shut.
Okay. James?
They were trying to survive, but everyone was scared. But Moses, and then God was right next to him, and then he opened up the water, and everyone was safe. And then the water closed, and then they were dancing.
Wonderful. Amelia?
I think that once the water was let all the people in, so that way the soldiers couldn't get them. Like once everybody was safe, the water closed. That way the soldiers couldn't get them.
Wonderful. I wonder what part of the story we could take out, but still have everything we need. I guess we're all going to run it. James.
Maybe the soldiers, maybe.
Okay, maybe the soldiers.
Because they could maybe be safer if there was no soldiers.
Go ahead.
I think are we leaving something out?
Yeah, is there a part of the story I told you that we could leave out, but still have everything we need from the story?
We could leave out the emperor.
Oh, the Pharaoh? Okay. I wonder where you are in this story.
People of God.
The people of God?
The people of God. People of God.
Okay, that one seems pretty straightforward. We are the people of God. All right, boys and girls, we'll stop the video here and we'll have some work time.
Bye.
Bye.